COVID-19 has forever changed the way we work and live. We have been forced to deal with uncertainties about the future, just as we have reorganized life around our home offices. Managers have grappled with challenges of communicating with and leading their virtual teams, with little training or time to learn the ropes. They have had to redesign hiring processes and onboarding of employees, monitoring and managing performance without intruding into the lives of their team members or adding to their stress. They have had to motivate employees and keep their morale high, even as they grapple with logistics and production challenges, and met customer requirements under severe constraints. BCG has rightly called the ongoing pandemic a people-based crisis. Yet, the organizational engine has continued to chug, alibi on a track that was being laid as it chugged along. The Economist noted that the pandemic has highlighted the critical role of HRM, often unfairly dismissed as a soft function. Never before have human resource managers been so crucial to the organization, and they continue to captain the ship through the choppiest waters, with storms looming on the horizon. It's indeed an opportune moment for us to take stock of the fundamental shift in HRM practices that have helped organizations navigate the pandemic. In addition, some of the tactical alterations in employee lifecycle management processes, including hiring, onboarding, training, performance management, may now have to adopt into a permanent shift in people management practices. Formerly incidental functions like health and safety have now assumed utmost importance. Workplaces have had to be rearranged to make it safe for employees to return to their shop floor and offices. Today's panel discussion will focus on this shift and changes in HRM practices and the challenges that we face in institutionalizing them for the long term. I welcome the esteemed panelists and thank all of them for joining us today. I now hand over the podium to Professor Simi to continue the conversation. Professor Simi.
So today's panel, we have chosen people from different streams of HR who will be talking about the challenges from different sides, different perspectives. And together we are hoping to see the issue from all the different perspectives so that we can knit it together to see how to take HRM forward as a discipline, as an area of research and as an area of teaching and practice. So I would like to invite Professor Vijay Pereira first, who will be talking about strategic HRM and the role of strategic HRM specifically in looking at a post-pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic soon enough, world, and how organizations can look at the function in itself and broadening its scope, probably. Professor Pereira.
Thank you, Professor Simi. I will start by, I have 15 minutes, Professor Simi, or 10 to 15 minutes?
Try to stick within 10. That's what I would suggest, so that we have a bit more time in the end for discussion. That's all. Yeah, 10 to 15.
Can you hear me? I've lost you all here. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, Professor Pereira, we can hear you very clearly.
Okay. Sorry, I was I couldn't hear what Simi said. So I have 10 to 15 minutes, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I think I start with the age-old question of why is HR there? What is the role of HR? And as far back as 1997, when Dave Ulrich asked, should we do away with HR? And I think we can fast forward to 2020 when the pandemic hit, and we saw that, of course, we can't do without HR. And this time, I think HR has certainly come of age because everybody relied on HR. I mean, my forthcoming book, where I identify uh, around 12 key stakeholders, we saw that this is the 12 key stakeholders during the pandemic. We saw that HR, from an organizational perspective, was very much at the center of not only survival but also growth post the pandemic. And today I'll sort of touch upon some things that probably were controversial in the past but have come out during the pandemic. Some things that were taken for granted but have come out again. So for many years I asked my students and people who I teach, executives, really, is HR strategic? Can HR be ever strategic? Or is it just, on paper that we are strategic? And and really the answer by the executives who are in HR in different parts of the world, and the students who are training, and the evidence that we have of the black box of, the classic black box of, you know, is it because of the good HR practices, good HR strategies? Where is the evidence that it leads to better performance, firm performance? There's the black box, and for years people have been researching to sort of identify and unbundle that black box to provide evidence that yes, good HR practices, strategies, policies are leading to greater firm performance. And really, this pandemic has unbundled it in a very unique way. And let me explain how. When the lockdown first began, every organization there were people who didn't know what to do. So they come into work, so they not come into work. The first call that went out was to HR. Senior managers across the domain, including CEOs, began to ask, do we have a policy when such a crisis hits? If not, and so HR was straight away thrown into the fire. They were at the front line for employees. They had to scout the news, the local, the national, the international news to make sense of, because it was moving so fast. And so, the reliance on HR when it started began. And thereafter, in the last 2.5 years, it has increased. We have seen how, we moved to a online mode. We moved to, working remotely. And that opened a whole host of things. 20% cut in salary to 20% cut in staff. And who was to do it? HR, very much. I think Professor Priya, you talked about the dark side of things. That's another big problem. As we speak, over the years, how much of control should HR have over its employees? This pandemic has brought out the dark side of electronic HRM. I'm doing a special issue in the International Journal of Manpower Planning, where the dark side of electronic HRM is under researched, really. But again, we see practical examples from across the world. How do we monitor people who work remotely? Do we have, for example, recordings of every conversation that takes place on an organization Zoom meeting? Just an example. We've had instances where there were people who were living in a one-bedroom house, and the children, let's say 2 children, go to school, and the wife is also working, and you can't conduct meetings. And so what then? And so I think, HR has come right to the forefront. Now, how much of this will continue? It will, because we will say this is the new normal. Organizations have already begun to say, even when there is a recovery, like you said, whenever that is, HR will have to monitor people working remotely. So the use of technology has again increased. And even before the pandemic, organizations such as IBM had already moved to 51% of their employees working remotely from home. And so that has sort of sped up because of the pandemic. Now, the relationships is the strategic relationships that puts HR at the center. What do I mean by that? Is that now it has become the responsibility of HR to maintain good business relationships. And my forthcoming book talks about, again, how HR is at the center of that relationship. What do I mean by that? The classical employment relationship where we had 3 or 4 parties. Yes, we had employer-employee, we had employee government, trade unions. These were 3 or 4 different parties. Yeah, employee representative, i.e., the trade union, or any other representative. That classical employment or industrial relations has now changed. Going into the future, we will see how HR has broadened that party, 3 or 4 party, how HR is now at the center of what Ulrich calls the strategic business partner. We will see how HR is now going to be involved with many relationships that involve businesses. My forthcoming book, like I say, we have captured evidence of this between the 12 stakeholders where HR plays a key role. And I think that is moving towards something really strategic, something where we call HR is now truly finding its place in an organization going forward. And so I've touched upon how it has evolved, how it has, the pandemic has sort of driven what we have been discussing and researching and debating for years of whether HR, first of all, whether HR can be strategic, and if so, how. And we've talked about the unrelenting challenges of managing people remotely, the use of technology, the dark side of electronic HRM. We know the benefits, but we don't know the dark side of things. Bullying, ethical behavior, biases at an international level, racism. All of this have been actually being captured. In sort of you can't hide from technology. As we speak, this is being recorded. There is no going back. You see, so it's live. It's for HR. It's a huge task. And again, you can't remove this. Now, in terms of where HR strategy can come in. Now, saying or merely discussing HR being strategic doesn't suffice. We have to go and understand what is the sort of setup in an organization, correct? Now, strategists very often say we need the vertical and the horizontal strategic fit. We know that there is the corporate level strategy, the organization level strategy, then comes the HR strategy and so on. And again, within HR, the horizontal fit of, from recruitment to training and so on and so forth. So the inverted T is what I call it. Now, is there alignment between the overall organizational strategy and HR strategy in terms of the vertical fit? Now, here comes the problem. Here comes the challenge. Because of HR moving to the center or HR driven, if you look at the model, soft model, hard model, contextual model, and so on of HR, because of HR coming to the center because of where we are. And again, post-pandemic, there will be more challenges where HR will be called upon to advise and help in developing that strategy. That's where we are. So I think we are moving towards a new HRM model, a new strategic HRM model where HR will be HR driven, because HR will be the consultant to be asked what to do for the future. And so you see that we are thrown in as people in HR right at the center of things. And again, the more successful organizations who I'm talking to collecting data are talking about, there is evidence that an HR-centric model is being developed and is being seen as the future. Again, we can say contextually, this is what it has driven. The new normal as we see it, not subsiding. HR is here to stay, and HR is now the part of the overall organizational strategy. They are advisors to that strategy because, again, as you said, Professor Priya, it's become people centric, and when a business becomes people centric and is dependent, HR's role automatically comes to the fore. I think I'll stop there because I've sort of touched upon several points. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pereira, for beautifully mapping out the field as it stands now. So tracing the historical dilemmas that the discipline had and connecting it with the challenges that pandemic opened up and the future challenges, the role that HR has to assume, and especially bringing to the point that it has to be people-centric, and HR assumes the human resource as such, assumes the importance, but not forgetting the positives and negatives of that challenge, the dark side and possibilities that offer. So it's a huge task, a huge ask for HR professionals, HR researchers, HR teachers. So now what we'll do probably with the rest of our panelists to go down in each of these different aspects there. So may I request Professor Manjari Singh? She's a professor of HR at IIM Ahmedabad, and she'll be talking specifically about the employee well-being and engagement aspects. Yeah, and employee performance and engagement aspect, because that has become a big problem. So some of the issues that Professor Pereira touched upon as to how do you manage the performance remotely, but you have to also ensure the well-being of the person. So what does that look like at this point in time? Professor Manjari.
Okay, thank you, Simi. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this very interesting panel discussion. And as you were saying, Professor Pereira has laid down some very important points, so we can build up on those points. As Priya mentioned, HR has become people-centric. Professor Pereira has also mentioned the dark side to it. People-centric meaning that employee performance plays a very, very important role. And when Professor Pereira mentioned that all were looking towards HR as to how to go about things, one of the key aspects they were all looking for to how to ensure that employee productivity and performance can be maintained or enhanced. I think enhanced part can be kept at bay right now. First, their more serious this thing was that how productivity can be maintained. Okay. Now, first, going by the process point of view of PMS, if we look at the three key components of PMS, goal setting became a big challenge, not just because of the uncertainty and ambiguity itself. What can be measured if all the norms by which the organization was working has suddenly changed? Okay. So whether goal setting will, what is getting measured will be input or output or outcomes or impact. In a lot of cases, organizations felt they need to focus on outcomes, but then they were having so much uncertain environment that they were not clear how to measure even that outcome for them. The second part was assessment. Okay. Is assessment becoming more difficult with the better use of technology or less difficult? Okay, that became a question whether supervisory biases have increased or decreased. Now we are not interacting on regular basis the way we were in the organizations earlier. So now the interactions have become maybe more formalized. In that sense, do supervisors understand the subordinates well or not? Whether Professor Pereira also mentioned about relationship building. So employees' relationship with all constituents are affected. In that sense, how to do a proper assessment of their performance. The third aspect, and the very key one, which became the really a big challenge for HR was employee feedback. Trust and mutual understanding forms such a key basis for constructive feedback, both for supervisors to be confident to provide that feedback and employees to accept that feedback. Okay. So that also became challenge. Is sometimes online feedback becoming a bit too harsh for employees? Are they losing their motivation to work when this is happening? So these are the questions that supervisors felt that that needs to be addressed. And again, they looked at HR as to how to go about it. Yeah. So in these processes, two aspects became important. One was, I would say a few aspects, I would touch on a few ones. The information sharing. Okay. Now, informal information sharing became very difficult, almost non-existent. Formally, how much information to share? Is sufficient information getting shared for employee productivity to be maintained? Is sufficient information to be shared, is getting shared that employee engagement is not adversely affected? Or so is it too much information is getting shared that sometimes privacy, etc. aspects come into play? Okay. The other was dark side that you were mentioning about, Dr. Pereira was mentioning, has monitoring process become very intrusive? Is it leading to, again, a lack of engagement on the part of employees because they are losing their autonomy? Too much intrusive monitoring is happening. They feel that their employers are not trusting them enough. They are losing the flexibility to work. So these aspects also came in terms of employee performance. Now, employee performance in the current scenario cannot overlook the enhanced role of technology and the digitalization that many organizations who may not have been prepared for were forced at a very steep learning curve to inculcate. Okay. Now, this is one, the process aspect. The other aspect I'll just quickly touch upon, given that time is this, is I would like to also look at employee performance from the theoretical lens of JDR model. Jatin, hello. So I had to mention when I'm mentioning JDR model, Jatin, that's he has worked on it a lot. So he can add to things later. Let me just briefly touch upon it. So basically what we are looking at, job demands and job resources affect employee stress. They affect employee well-being. As Simi was mentioning, employee well-being has become very, very critical for organizations at present. All three aspects of employee well-being, be it physical, be it psychological, be it social. Okay. Then the other job demands and resources affect directly or indirectly employee engagement, vigor, dedication, and absorption in terms of work engagement of the employee. And directly or indirectly, the employee well-being as well as employee engagement is going to affect employee performance, whether it's task performance or contextual performance. Now, why I found JDR model to be more interesting theoretical lens than anything else, because what are job demands? The job demands are basically work pressure. Work pressure has increased a lot, whether be it because the deadlines are unclear, because the job itself is unclear, because the relationships are undergoing drastic changes. There are many aspects which is affecting work pressure. Emotional demands on the employees have undergone a sudden change. And also, Professor Pereira has already touched upon the work-family conflict that is coming up. The boundary between work and family has diminished with work, remote work model, etc. And even if we look at offline mode, now these boundaries have diminished because household responsibilities also has changed for employee. The dynamics at family level has drastically changed, affecting the work-family conflict that the employee is undergoing. So this is the demand side. Now on the job resources side, support, the first dimension of it, the support, both supervisory support and colleague support. Okay. That has changed its forms, particularly in remote work models or in partial work models. The interaction, the quantity of interaction has drastically changed. Do employees feel that they get sufficient support from their peers? Is because informal interactions have drastically reduced, at least the physical ones, is peer learning becoming a casualty in all this? Peer learning, which is a very, very important component here. Is team cohesion getting affected because everyone is now actually connected only online? Very little offline connection is left. Is harmony or good working relationship getting affected for the same reason? Also autonomy, which is a very, very important job resource. We have already talked about intrusive monitoring, the dark side. To what extent autonomy is getting affected? And is coaching and mentoring provided by organization changing its form? And in its changed form, is it something that is helping employees out, and to what extent? Okay. So these are some of the points where HR needs to look at very carefully its policies, etc., and also the relationship of PMS with other key HRM systems, as Professor Pereira was talking about the horizontal fit. Okay. With this, I would stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Manjari, for a very insightful deepening of some of the earlier themes that were laid out. That brings us a lot more questions in terms of performance management. Okay, that's hard as it is, but then this work from home, that and employees not being there, as well as use of technology even more, that brings in a lot more challenges for performance management. But at the same time, that cannot be at the expense of employee well-being, because COVID has proven to us that that's equally or important. So now, as an organizational studies scholar, my take on that. So the well-being and the performance, that becomes two things to balance, with each has more things weighing them down now. So you have to take up both and you have to balance both. So a lot more questions and a lot more research and insights that we need to draw on from this. Thank you, Professor Manjari. Now, may we have Professor Manoranjan Thal. He's a professor with IIM Kozhikode, specifically looking at labor issues. And pandemic showed us the issues the laborers faced more than ever before. So a lot of the things that we don't normally see, we were forced to look at that, and maybe for the first time to realize that informal economy is actually the base of the formal economy, and things are tied and we can't ignore. So I invite Professor Manoranjan Thal to talk more about those aspects. Professor Manoranjan.
Thank you, Professor Simi. And just to build upon what Professor Vijay and Professor Manjari talked about, so I am digressing a little bit towards the blue collar workers and the migrant workers. So I know the role this HR is going to play in the organization, but sometimes I feel anguished by the incidents regarding the people management, being a person in HR. So this anguish, I convert it into my research. This is where I work and the field of labor. So I have a brief PPT and I would like to start with that. So yeah, so I am starting with yes. Okay. Yeah. So I hope you right.
Yes, Professor.
Yes,
Mandari.
please.
तो जलती तपती सड़क पर सूरज की गर्मी से पिघलते भूख और प्यास की गठरी उठाए हुए कंधों पर नंगे पांव बड़े नगर से अपने छोटे गांव को अपने छोटे घरों को लौट रहे हैं। वो घर जो पैरों की ताकत दिल की हिम्मत से भी आगे, बहुत ही आगे, जाने कितनी दूरी पर है। सूखे होंठ है, खाली आंखें, पांव में छाले, पर चलते रहने के सिवा रास्ता भी क्या है। फैक्ट्री के दरवाजे जब दोनों के मुंह पर बंद हुए थे, ठेकेदार ने जब था इन्हें एक आधी बनी बिल्डिंग से निकाला, कौन था इनका पूछने वाला। कोई भी उम्मीद किसी रास्ते में नहीं थी। सब नगरी सुनसान पड़ी थी, हर बिल्डिंग अनजान खड़ी थी, सारे मकान और सारी दुकानें अपनी आंखें बंद किए थे। उसी नगर में अब ये दोनों थे परदेसी, जहां ये बरसों मरे जिए थे। और जलती
So this is the time when the migrants decided that we would die from the virus at our own village than starve because of no work in the city. And this picture is not unfamiliar to you. And I am going to talk a little bit about the reverse migration, insights, implications, and the research agenda. So just to take a little bit facts into account, the Economic Survey of India 2017 estimated the interstate migrant population as 60 million. And the majority of the people, those who migrate from the home state or the origin states are Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, West Bengal, Rajasthan. So Odisha being my home state. And I consider myself as a migrant, though not the blue color. So the destination states are Delhi, Kerala, where I am, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu. COVID-19 led lockdown might have induced at least 35 to 40 million instances of reverse migration, including the interstate and circular migration. And this is a map which shows that, okay, so this is an old map, but either it shows that it shows to destination, that is how the Indian migrant population moves from one city to one state to another. So I have 10 minutes. I know in the way I'm being confining to that. So you can look at the unemployment rate in India, how the spike has happened, particularly in during March to June. So it had touched 23.52%. And this is what's the time when the migrants started returning. So the crossroad where the migrants found themselves in difficulties, that was, if you look at the estimated 51.8 crore people is the labor force, out of which 48.8 crore employed and 3 crores are unemployed. Urban casual workers, that accounts for 11.2% of the urban workforce. And we all know that 93% of the workforce are in informal sector. So consequently, when they fail to accumulate enough saving to survive even a week in the absence of employment, and that's what is the precarious stage and precarious economic state of our informal workers, they started and they decided to come back to their villages. And you can look at the most affected sectors, manufacturing and trade, hotels and restaurants. They each employ roughly around 5.9 crore employees, informal workers, while construction sector employs roughly around 5.7 crore people. And these are the people, those who are badly impacted, and they started returning. 63.19 lakhs migrant workers has traveled only through the Shramik special trains as per the railway data. So obviously there was job loss, there was loss of livelihood, but what was also more dramatic, there was why they started returning, because there was poor health and safety conditions in the highly populated labor camps, and you know the conditions of the labor where they stay in the destination locations. Though the contractor has the liability to provide them the accommodation, the principal employer has liability to provide them the minimum benefits, but you know the status of law and law implementation that where these poor people are really struggling. So poor living conditions associated with work-related health risks, and wage theft is not a new concept. Wage theft was happening, but so pandemic forced the employers to even rampantly following wage theft in non-payment of the wages. So delayed. Then finally there was no payments when the migrant labor started even approaching the level. There are instances that the employers threaten to file false complaint if you ask for wage. So lack of healthcare system to deal with the inflow of the migrants. So either what happened in this structural migration, what is happening that when people traveling from rural to urban, it is all well accepted. When the economy is going back, there is a reverse migration. So our rural economy is not ready to take that load. So that's where the major challenges opened up because of the vulnerability of the rural communities, and they are also, when they try to return, they are also stigmatized and they are viewed as the spreaders of virus in the destination, in their home village. They are not allowed to enter to the village. So you see this stigmatization due to the restrictive healthcare policies. There is no infrastructure available. So the city is not there, the village is not there. Where will they go? And if you look at the legal stances that we have an Interstate Migrant Workers Regulation of Employment Act, which aims to protect, but migrant experience never proved that because of this act at least exists. There is no compliance, and there are stigmatization, there are hostility, there are discrimination, there are even caste-based discrimination during the quarantine period, during the health camps. So informal workers with no enforceable contract between the workers and the contractors, it was very difficult. So the contractors themselves are not registered. Then who has the owners of these employees? Professor Vijay was talking about the stakeholders. Who is the stakeholder? Is the government? Is the trade union? Is the contractor? Is the employer? Is the NGO? And who does own these people? Who do they work for? When L&T says that I am not finding people to complete my construction activities. So where will I get the laborers? Are they back? How am I designing my policy? What is the role of HR? HR says that okay, I'll take care of the executives. What about these blue collar employees? And they don't have any bargaining power, so they can be exploited. And Professor Manjari was talking about the pressure of performance. This is pressure of costs. So one side pressure of survival of the business, the other side the human beings. We are not even treating the human being as human being. Okay. So I think that I can stop here. We can talk more about this. So
can you accept the screen share here? Thank you
yeah.
very much. Thank you, Professor Manoranjan, first of all, for starting with such an evocative poem. I think that put us back to where we were some time ago, because we forget fast. And then bringing all those facts about what happened at that time, so that it's not just an evocative feeling, but there are the harsh reality forms of it. So for me, when I see what Professor Manjari talked about, well-being, this is also a well-being issue. But then just by classifying some people are people on our payrolls, they are employees, the others who are not on our payrolls, they become migrants and their issues becomes completely separate. So as Professor Manoranjan asked, the question is, who's responsible for them? And is that a challenge for HR? I wish it really is, and I would like to think so. So with that thought, we'll move forward to Professor Jatin Pandey. He's with IIM Indore. He'll be talking about the work from home challenges for employees and managers, because we saw one of the major shifts that happened during pandemic is that the workplace is no longer a workplace, the office, the physical setting. It has moved elsewhere, and going forward, maybe it will continue in a lot of different ways. So what kind of challenges will that throw for employees as well as managers if we are going in for institutionalizing these models? Professor Jatin.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Simi and Professor Priya, for giving me the opportunity to speak on the topic. Though, of course, I doubt the marginal utility of my contributions, after the stalwarts have spoken on the topic, on the broad arena that they have set. However, I'll give it a try. My talk essentially is based on the research that I started in Feb 2020, essentially to understand the stress levels of people, during the time of pandemic. And it essentially started with a conversation I had with the CEO of our institute, Kanan Pamidi, who asked a question that, what do you think is the stress levels of people in this, in the state of pandemic? And I, taking the route of a academician, said, I have no data, so I can't tell you anything. And he said, I can conduct a study and, a survey, and let's see what comes out of it. So with that understanding of stress levels at that point of time, and then building upon my interactions with industry professionals, somehow I have developed few pointers as to what I see are the major challenges in this work from home setting, right? The challenges are clearer, but the solutions are not so. So especially for the HR professionals, as we have said, the boundary spanning role that the HR does, and essentially, as Professor Pereira said, that the vertical fit and the horizontal fit that the HR has to ensure, it becomes more important now that the HR essentially is more capable, essentially is more, has more capacity enhanced so that he can take, care of issues of others. So in this, essentially, when we see this work and home domain, basically these two domains have been studied separately, right? And these two domains are seen separately and all three levels. Physically, we say, where are you going? I'm going to work used to be the answer that we used to give. So of course, there was a physical distance between work and home. And essentially also this distance was socially accepted distance. People used to ask, where do you work? And someone said, okay, I live here, but I work there. It was said to be okay. And the third thing, that this distance was also psychological, that I understood that this is my domain of work and this is my domain of home, right? And these two domains were essentially different. But then there is also research, and built upon this theories. And one theory that comes to my mind is the work-family border theory. Essentially, it said that there is a border between work and family, and if this border is weak, there will be a flow of work-related stress to family and family-related stress to work. And this essentially also had concepts on the positive spectrum of work-family enrichment and the negative spectrum of work-family conflict. Of course, bidirectional work to family, family to work. But then, if we see now, this border is non-existent from the, work from home setting. And essentially, this becomes important that these theories of work to family and family to work, where we assume that these two are two separate domains, needs to be relooked. The first concern, therefore, which we saw, and the phenomena that was observed was this beautiful phenomena of work from home and work for home. So all of us remembered that, there was also an element of work from home was dictated by work, but work for home was dictated by home, essentially. And as Professor Manjari has clearly indicated, that these increased the demands at both fronts. You had work demands, you also had family demands. And essentially this abnormal increase in demand led to loss in productivity via routes of engagement, via routes of stress. So this essentially needs to be closely looked into, that this work family the whole literature on work family from this lens of no border between work and family. Essentially, even looking at it from what probable solutions can we think of as managers for this, the ideal approach seems to be of, structuring, ideally physical structuring where work and my family spaces are separate. But then, as Professor Dhal also pointed out, it might not be, even for white collar employees, it might be difficult to have these lavish settings and having these two separate settings where your work is separate at home, and your essential other domestic chores are different. And therefore, we need to look at it more carefully, that how can this distance essentially be inculcated through family structuring, through psychological structuring, where we essentially assume that now is the time for work, right? So a broader research needs to be done in this front as well. Now, an interesting finding was also that on this study on how people were dealing with stress was quite interesting, and it aligned with a previous work that I did with Professor Singh on religion-based coping mechanisms, something quite interesting. We did find that from these two domains of work and family, there seems to be a third domain which religious-based coping mechanisms provide, right? Where essentially the flow between work and family, if there is one border that can be created, is religion-based coping mechanisms. For some, we did find it could be, any practices that they do through, which essentially which buffers the impact of one domain on the other. So this was one thing which was quite interesting and may need finer study on how these essentially would have an impact on outcomes like morale, like productivity, motivation, etc. The other thing which was quite interesting was how essentially collaboration and communication, these two C's of collaboration and communication, essentially are being challenged through this work from home setting, right? As we know, most of the communication is non-verbal. And in this case, though technology has come to the rescue, still there exists a lacuna in terms of how well can we communicate and hence collaborate. So these mechanisms, managers need to have a dive into these mechanisms, that apart from technology, what else can we think of for enhancing this communication and collaboration? A similar theme from this communication was of loneliness and isolation. So humans being social animals, we are attuned to having those social interactions over that cup of coffee that we have. Now in these cases where these isolation, where we are working from home, and even if we are able to have that secluded setting where we can concentrate, still these isolation and loneliness creep in. So which in turn, of course, would have an impact on the employee well-being. Now, the primary results of what we started in Feb around 2020 showed that the levels of stress was actually moderate, not very high. But then since Feb 2020, this prolonged engagement and prolonged stress, I do believe will pave way for burnout among employees, and the HR managers need to be well in advance, need to prepare themselves. How would they deal with these challenges? Of course, there are other important issues of motivation. And one example is for the two generations, one generation which says the PJ mindset, or the older ones who would say the pajama mindset that we have come to while working on Zoom, right? And I was looking at it, and there's a beautiful paper, titled Enclothed Cognition. And it says beautifully that, though it was written quite back on, I think, 2012, and not written for the pandemic, but the findings are quite interesting. And it says that people perform work tasks better when wearing clothes with symbolic meaning. So example, a doctor would work better when the doctor is wearing the white coat. A surgeon would work better when the surgeon dons the setup of essentially the surgeon. And therefore, these things of how essentially to motivate employees essentially is a challenge which HR manager has to think of, has essentially also have to think of what mechanisms, have to think out of the box. The essential training and development that we have, the training and development models which we had now needs to be relooked at. The motivation mechanisms that we had now needs to be relooked at. Now, these are questions for which essentially I believe as academicians, we need to look for answers, right? And through, I believe, through proper research, we can come out with some findings, some leeways here and there where existing resources can actually be adjusted for providing way for managing the employees. With this, I'll end my talk and back to you, Professor Simi.
Thank you, Professor Jitin. So here, Professor Jitin beautifully brought out the nuances of the individual experience, the different facets of it very beautifully. And also, I'm very thankful to you, Professor Jitin, for mentioning solutions, because I was feeling the burden of, yes, we threw out a lot of issues there, but then who's going to find the answer? But you are pointing directions to where we can find potential answers. So by identifying these are the specific problems, and also these might be the coping mechanisms people have had, and then these are the potential directions probably HR can, as practice and researchers, we can help in that process, can turn to. So that does leave us with hope. It's not all doomed. So with that, thank you for that. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions, even though I'm brimming with questions, but I'll leave it, I'm sure all of you have questions. So what my request will be, if you could raise your hands, then I will invite each person to ask their own question. Yeah, thank you. So we have Jubin Kumar Saini. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Ma'am, thank you so much. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah, a very like a stupid question from my side is to all the esteemed panelists that all these challenges, except Jatin sir, that they only talk about these are the challenges. But what should we do as a young researcher? As I am into my PhD right now, and I am about to complete it by maybe in next 6 months or so. So in this young age, what do you suggest us as a young researcher? So should we explore more challenges, or should we go for the solutions? Because being an academician, these both should be our job, not just to find the solution, but also to find the challenges. I would be very grateful if you, any one of you, could answer me on this. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are. I thought Professor Pereira may like to answer that, so I was waiting for him.
Yes, if I can, yeah, please, yeah. Was it Jobin?
Yes, I am listening.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Okay. Yeah, I think when any crisis we are hit by any crisis, whether big or small, the dust is yet to settle. What we normally do as academics or researchers or investigators of a particular phenomena or crisis is first of all look at how previous crises were sort of resolved, the challenges, because as we speak we are still uncovering the challenges, and so this is a ongoing global pandemic, and the crisis, the challenges, the dark side of things, the responsibilities, we are still beginning to uncover. And as I spoke yesterday in my session yesterday, I said for young researchers it's very important to first of all identify the problem, the challenge, the research questions. These become very, very important to frame. These take a long time. You can't jump into identifying a challenge which is not actually the challenge. And so we have to go to the bottom of things to understand what are the real problems and what is the root cause of the problems, where does this lie, and then begin the investigation, because we do not want temporary solutions. We want long-term solutions. We want solutions that many years later people will cite. We don't want to identify quick fix questions and quick fix solutions. We have to wait, as I'm saying. So again, the maximum amount of research that was done in any crisis was the COVID. I sit on several editorial boards, and I on several review boards across different domains in the business and management discipline, and I have seen a burst of research. And 90% or 95%, unfortunately, are these solutions or these questions that are not looked at very well, because as by the time you have 1 year is the process, correct? Whether it's a B journal or a C journal or an A journal, 1 year is an average time. The problem has evolved and it's non-existent. So also bigger journals and other journals were beginning to have a quick turnaround on the COVID. But the challenges of the COVID are so quick and fast moving that the challenge of today is no longer the challenge of tomorrow. And so I think once the dust settles, that's the time to look at investigating what has happened. Because you remember, what we are doing is we are scholars of business and management. We have to wait and have patience, because again, I just quickly repeat myself, the research questions, the challenges need to be framed very well. That problematization, as I talked about yesterday, is very, very important before you start to investigate, because your solution and problem is not going to be worthwhile or worthy of an investigation if you rush into things. That's my take on it.
Thank you so much. Thank
If I can add,
Yes.
so borrowing the leaf from Professor Pereira, yesterday Professor Vijay was mentioning about three things: problematization, contextualization, theorization. So these are the three things which he was mentioning. I'm just borrowing his words. And first thing is that the problem. It reminds me a joke. A person goes to the emergency ward of a hospital, and when he is about to enter the emergency ward, there is a board which says there will be rules for emergency patients: 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 10th point says that if you have so much time to read these instructions, then you are not an emergency patient. Go to general ward. Okay. So for me, if the problem is not disturbing your sleep, then it is not a problem. It's not just that we are doing some academic writing. For me, I don't know either. Okay, so these problems disturb my sleep. I was so much impacted mentally by the incident which happened by the in the Maruti HR manager being burnt alive. So we wrote a case. Okay. So if the problem, you are really feeling the pinch of the problem, please try to find a solution, Jubin. So that's what is a young researcher I can expect. And the problem is here. So there is not much a big problem than COVID. COVID is a major problem, and context is there, problem is there. Then you just need to find out the theorization, put it in the context, and study. And some of this, the problem which I was mentioning, so though there are these migrant laborers, they face the pinch, but there are employers, those who facilitated the payment, those who facilitated the travel. So I'm just naming ITC. ITC is a company. So they thought that we are not able to pull out all our even cleaning staff, all our service staff from the work. And this is the best time to invest in training. So instead of downsizing, they engage all these employees with full salary on exclusively training. So what are the factors which drives a company to do that? Is not it worth of investigating? What are those good HR practices which is coming even during the crisis? What is the ethical standards? Can I? So I'm a company. I'm an employer. I'm Tata. So what holds me as a company? Is it not worth of investigating? During crisis, your value system is tested. So here is a testing time to test the companies, their value system, their approach to employees, even at the bottom of the hierarchy. So test it, come back with a good theory, and that will lead to a good research.
Thank you, Professor Manoranjan.
Thank you
Professor
so much,
Manjari,
Professor,
what would be your...
for
Sorry,
thank you,
Jipin, go
Professor,
on.
yeah, ma'am. Thank you so much, Professor, for giving me a very new direction. As you rightly mentioned that if you have the pain, then surely you're gonna go for the solutions instead of discussing or instead of doing anything else than finding solution. Thank you so very much. Over to you, ma'am. Shimi, ma'am, over to you.
I think the point has been well covered, Simi. Let's move on to the next question. I think even
Maybe to piggyback on that question, how about the methodologies to pursue these questions? Are existing methodologies, a lot of the research uses positivist methodologies with established scales. Are they good enough going forward? What do we do?
Jatin, you want to answer that?
Yeah. So what we have clearly identified is there is a tilt towards the post-positivist paradigm in research, and it has been acknowledged as well. But I do believe that the other parts of the spectrum on viewing the constructivist nature of this pandemic, instead of looking at one objective realities, let us construe realities through these actors, because this particular phenomenon is not as such a country specific phenomenon, right? It is a global phenomenon, and therefore each of these actors at multiple levels will have different lenses looking at the same thing. So I believe that going forward, and Professor Pereira, who essentially is on the editorial desks, who would be seeing a change, I believe, would also be seeing a change from this post-positivist paradigms towards this constructivist paradigms, where essentially we are taking into account that people can have different opinions, essentially, and one truth is not the answer. Multiple truths can be constructed through different actors. And I believe we are moving in that direction. And I do acknowledge that it was post-positivist heavy, and we are moving towards these directions. Yeah.
Professor Manjari?
So agreeing with Professor Pandey, the thing is we were in a sort of more stable environment, if it can be called stable. Compared to pandemic, it was stable. So their post-positivist approach provided more depth to a lot of phenomena which has been explored earlier. So what was needed was more nuances to those phenomena. But now this chaos has completely changed the world. Now one has to, a lot of new realities are emerging. So with the emergence of those new realities, of course, methodologies, as Simi, you are very correctly pointing out, that one has to now go back to board and look at what methodologies would be suitable. I wouldn't say post-positivist has become completely redundant. In some scenarios that analysis also may work, but yes, that it's, what do you say, its significance may have drastically reduced. And for researcher, it's not just now a question of looking at the research problem, it's now also a question of what methodology would be most appropriate to look at that research problem. And based on research problem, one has to find a more appropriate one.
Thank you, Professor Manjari. Professor Vijay, you will
Yeah.
be seeing more articles coming now. So what do they
Yes.
say?
I think Professor Manjari and Professor Jatin are absolutely correct here. I think there are more questions being raised now that will push us to newer, more innovative methodologies. I think, I was involved with one project where we looked at how within a large organization in India, people used Google search engine to ask about the pandemic. And very interestingly, it moved so fast. So this data set, again, novel data set, where we had to bring on a technical person, an engineer on big data, to help us analyze and make sense of what is happening in this organization. So again, an example of, again, not ontologically and epistemologically, we are now crossing borders and saying there is one problem. We come from different disciplines to sort of make sense of this data. And I think that is going to be more and more the case. It's not that social scientists are now only going to work on social scientists. The data is so complex and moving so much. So again, the example I was giving you is classic. That the people who Googled about the pandemic, and in 14 days there were fatalities. You could see this graph moving, and then how long it takes for a paper. It's lying with the publisher, third round, for 3 months now, and we are telling him this is an important piece that needs to go out for policy making. And so again, I think we are faced with a situation that we have never faced before. Professor Manju, you're absolutely right. Things are absolutely going to be different going forward. And as researchers, we have to be innovative to sort of think, where do we and what do we use as method? The traditional methods, again, are going to be sort of, it's going to be more multidisciplinary. It's going to cross borders. It's going to be also the turnaround time for publication. There's pressure on all the journals. There's pressure. Like I said, even the journals began to turn it around based on the COVID situation. I think that's going to be more and more important, which should normally happen, but again, you can't compromise on. And there are the dark side of the publishing game, where some things may slip through, which is not good scholarship. And so the pressure is, yes, we need to turn around quickly. We need to use more and more robust methods, but it takes time. The process, and that is why we will always have a lag between the reality and the pressure on researchers to sort of move very quickly, but we cannot move very quickly because it's very fuzzy till we begin to understand that this is the right data set, this is the right method for identifying answers to these research questions. It's always going to be that lag. What has happened in the 1970s, we are still beginning to uncover now. The Enron case and so many other cases as examples.
Thank you, Professor Vijay.
Pereira, if I can ask you a question, do you think research studies in which are not contexts in the COVID pandemic scenario have a disadvantage now in terms of publication? Because
No,
the data have been collected and given. Does that kind of study take a backseat now that you have so much coming in a very contextualized environment? What would you say on that? What would you advise people who are working in a non-COVID context, for instance?
That's a very good and valid question, Priya. I think across business and management, one would say, and this is unlike the pure sciences. In business and management, I think like I said, just picking up from my last discussion, my points I raised in the last discussion, is that no. The answer is no. The journals are still looking for the non-COVID type things. We have a special section in at least 3 or 4 journals I'm involved with that was purely COVID. And then on the other hand, those that are into a lot and invest a lot of time, effort, and in their careers on the COVID are at a disadvantage, actually, because there's so much on. And all, suddenly we say, okay, no, it's too much on COVID now. Let's not think about COVID. In fact, we are pushing people to say, okay, this is your context. Sorry, this is your study in this context, in this era. What is it that you think would happen post-pandemic? So in the implication section is where we are looking at people to comment. And as as an editor, I'm looking at how my co-editors are also beginning to say in the final, like R2 or R3, okay, this is very interesting, but going forward in a post-pandemic era, this is the topic we're talking about today, since the last 2 hours, is what is the implications or what is the impact going to be for the future? Okay, you've done the study before COVID. Now COVID has hit. Okay, what else? And so practical implications for research for the future. All of these, we are asking them, but quickly answering your question, Priya, that no, I think editors and journals are very much aware that there is only so much space and that normal life will continue, has continued, and will continue in the future. And so those challenges are the SDGs. The focus on SDGs has, in fact, even more now post-pandemic. So, yeah.
Thank you, Professor Pereira. That was very comforting for me. Thank you.
Professor Surya?
Yeah, so my question to the panelists is a very simple one. Now that COVID has hit and we know that international migration cannot actually happen, the borders of the countries are repeatedly closing and opening. Even now, I think UK is again, and the Europe is again back to square one, if I can say that. So how do the panelists actually envision the future of work as far as international migration is concerned? The way we have understood globalization, has it ended? Because of course it's easy to say no, but at least the people from because we are in Kerala, we can see that people who worked in the Gulf, now they're back, and in India, or rather in Kerala, there are no jobs because the entire economy was dependent upon the Gulf. And Gulf now they are trying to reskill and sort of take the local population into, or absorb them back into their workforce. So how does the international migration actually span out after this pandemic, maybe 3 or 4 years down the line? Will companies ever want to go back for international workers? So anyone can sort of.
So immigration point was there, so I was waiting for Professor Dhal to respond. But okay. I have one thing to add before I hand over to Professor Dhal. Because Professor Dhal would, I think, like to cover about more the blue-collar workers, etc. But an interesting phenomena in white-collar workers is that even earlier we were talking about boundaryless career, etc. Now, even international boundaries have become less of this thing in a work from home model. So companies, if possible, if legal requirements are met, are thinking why, if they have to do online in the selection process, if they have to get online work done, why do they have to be constrained by international borders? They can as well get the workforce from the best possible location that they think is, and accordingly do the work, because the travel constraints are there, that is true. But then if the work model is remote work model, then those constraints, the effect of that is much less. Okay, so this I just wanted to add as to Surya's point, just as an additional this thing, but I would leave the floor to Professor Dhar.
Thank you, Professor Manjari. Just to add a couple of points that if you look at the remittances which India is receiving, it is close to, as per 2020 data, it is close to $78.6 billion. So, which is huge, and no country can afford to lose so much money. And things will be normal, people will be traveling. But the thing is that during this particular period, what happened, particularly the people, those who are working in Gulf. So that is, I think that there is a beautiful lesson which actually the government, when they started this mission to bring back the people, and there are also a couple of things which happened. There was an initiative by Government of India called Swades. Swades is basically for the skilled workers arrival database for employment support. That's what is the full form of Swades. So it was a joint initiative of Ministry of Skill and Development, Entrepreneurship, and Ministry of Civil Aviation. So that's how they basically try to do a skill mapping where they can deploy people in India as well as in foreign countries. So what is happening right now is that it is not just saying there is out migration just based on that you are just going and landing somewhere. If there can be such kind of thing which can happen, there goes, yeah. So government facilitates this migration where it is based on the skills. So that will be a great help to take it forward. And another thing which is there is a lack of database, there is a lack of monitoring. But in addition to that, so another major thing which came up is the pre-departure orientation program. So there is no communication. Neither the employees have the communication or the government is communicating properly. So government need to facilitate this pre-departure orientation program and communication, that too in the languages of the migrant workers. So that is another major requirement where actually the work can be done. But I am hopeful that okay, so the migration will be back, and some of these good things which actually so they try to do some welfare activities by taking care of these Indian community welfare fund, Pravasi Varatios, Sahayata Kendras, Pravasi Kushal Vikas Yojana, all these things which has started, particularly social security insurance. So those things if need to be taken care, formalized, standardized. So this has created, opened up the Pandora's box that there is no system in place. So this is where the major things came up. So now positive side of the COVID, so we have portals being created, we have databases being created, we have monitoring system coming into place, and that's what is essential, and that's what is going to help also.
Thank you, Professor Manoharan. So I'm stuck with a question when Professor Pereira was earlier talking. Academic endeavor research, by the very nature of it, we take time to yield insights. And when things like this happen, people on the practice side, they need help. They need quick insights and things that they can try. Is there any way that we can help in that process, or will we have to be the helpless bystanders in that?
Yeah, thanks, Professor Simi. That's a very good question. No, I think, in fact, consulting is very much the need of the hour. What the consultants we are as academics, our word is more valuable than let's say a PwC consultant who does a quick fix of numbers and based on projections. But I think more and more academics have been called upon for consulting to find solutions. SMEs, for example, or at a macro level at the national human capital, the planning for the future. I think more and more academics across the world, whether it's developed countries or emerging countries, I think we are involved with, in India, you have the IIMs who are involved with many consulting projects, and similarly in other parts of the world. I was in the UAE as part of my consulting project for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and we talked about the post-COVID workforce. What is the workforce for the future for the UAE? And I was part of this sort of think tank to say, and again, it overlaps with what Professor Surya was asking, and especially for the state of Kerala. It's the opposite, Surya. I would say, post-pandemic, the need for well-trained, well-skilled people from across the world is going to be exponential. It's going to double, because let's say the pandemic was not there, you still needed them. Now you need them even more because you're going to kickstart your economy at a macro level. Industries will look for the best. In fact, the localization programs of the Middle East have to take a backseat for the time being, because localization happens where it's normal times, but where because you're not trained, so you will need more skilled, more trained people going forward. So answering your question, Professor Simi, academics are in a very good position as consultants, because the whole point about finding a solution is to find a well-balanced argument and plan A, B, and C based on scenario A, B, and C. I think that sort of a mindset is required that we academics have. But the publishing is another game. But yes, answering your question very much, a lot of academics will be involved with, and there will be greater opportunities for consulting for both the private as well as the public sector.
I would like to add to Professor Pereira's excellent point that yes, as academicians we have multiple roles. Researcher is one of the roles. Consultant is another role. And as Professor Pereira is pointing out, our credibility as consultant is pretty high, based in management schools. And also the other role, that of the trainer. I think Professor Dhal was pointing out, or Professor Pandey was pointing out, that some organizations actually, when they realized that there's not enough work for employees, they wanted employees to go for training. So online training have picked up a lot. I'm sure your institute's experience also would have been a similar one, though unfortunately we were not able to cater to much of it because the other constraints also played a role. In some cases, even organizations who were very willing to do it, some other constraints played a role. But but many organizations, at least the ones who can be considered to be ethically and morally look in a positive light, we're looking at how to develop employees further, the other point why these training programs became very important was organizations were struggling how to maintain employee engagement. Given that work-wise there has been a setback for employees, how to ensure that they would still be interested. A lot of work in remote work had become very routine for employees. In case of that, where to bring the intrinsic motivation, where to bring some challenges in the work, that became a big question for the organizations, that how to have their current workforce engaged. And also, if you're looking at post-pandemic scenario, some organizations are suddenly facing attrition issues. Because with economy opening up, if people are getting more opportunities, then they would like to get out of the routine work that they are doing and would like to, even if it's a similar work, doing in a different setup, they may find it more challenging than continuing to work in the same mode. So how to retain the employees that they want to retain became another big challenge for the employees. Developing the employees became a challenge again, because all the normal HRM processes were sort of got suspended. They were not working effectively. Training needs assessment, how to do it properly. Okay. So if the development needs are not getting properly identified, if development modes are changing drastically, how to develop employees so that they see some future in the same organization. I'll stop here. Manisha, you wanted to say something.
Professor Manoranjan, would you like to chip in there? Okay, I think Manisha. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, those are the fun parts of it, right?
For me, the question looks like I can relate it to a mosque deer. Mosque deer basically doesn't know where the essence coming from. And I consider Professor Priya and you, both of you are mosque deers for me. Those who are doing so much work on this center of social innovation. When two academicians going back to the grassroots level, working with the grassroots population, changing their lives and all. There is a possibility of research. There is a possibility of bringing in the change, and a lot can happen. And as academicians, it is not just to do. Yeah. So consulting, working for the executive, solving executive problems. But this is also the other side is to work with the government and write more policy papers. So I think sometimes I feel that yeah. So one side is the so-called ABDC, AA star publications and all, but the other side is to impact the life of the people and the stakeholders. That's where I am coming from, where the academicians can contribute a lot, maybe through consulting with the government or maybe working through these developmental activities, partnering with government, taking up projects. There are lots of opportunity where we can pitch.
Thank you, Professor Manoranjan. Probably I have one last question, and we did not touch upon teaching. So my question to you will be, what do we teach our students now? Does anything have to change in that? In terms of the contents, in terms of the philosophies, in terms of how we deliver, how do we prepare them for a very uncertain world?
You want me
to add to Simi's question, I was also thinking, how do we present questions and just discuss questions when we ourselves don't have solutions to what lies ahead? How do you discuss that, Professor Manoranjan, in class?
Okay, so I can start with one thing. What I'm experiencing is that going by the changes, going by the technology, and also always I feel there is some of the content what I am teaching now is available in all these webinars, all these MOOCs of the world, and also there was what I can make a difference is basically sensitizing the people. So right now, particularly during pandemic, there was in one of the research project when we were conducting interviews, we found that there was so employees are experiencing that the managers particularly are losing out in their empathy. So the empathy is missing. People say that Professor Jatin was talking about that say the diminishing boundary of the work family and family work. So now managers are calling and saying that, hey, why can't you work 2 hours more? Anyway, you are traveling. Okay. Anyway, you are at work. So you can reply at 10 o'clock in night also. So where is the empathy? Where is the empathy? Where is the sensitivity? So the sensitivity towards the problem, sensitivity towards people, being a HR researcher, that I will talk about there was sensitivity towards people, sensitivity towards the life of others. So if we cannot bring that sensitivity among the students, otherwise some of these concepts, theories, they can read and learn. So this is where I think that we can touch upon the life of the student.
Thank you, Professor Manoranjan. Professor Jatin?
Yeah, adding to it, my experience would be the least among the panelists. But essentially what I have seen is, there were concepts that we have been harping upon. We have been saying VUCA since pre-pandemic as well. But if you say this is the time of VUCA, when is it was, we have been all our theoretical models ready and having, 2 or 3 classes on strategic management saying how to essentially align our HR in the VUCA world. So I believe these are also opportunities for us to ponder and see that what we had been teaching, essentially, how do they fit now, right? And essentially, the competency lies, essentially, we also need to take a relook on realigning our teaching pedagogy, right, that we have been using, are usually the, the session plans that we have, how do we align them to present day dynamics. So a little burden also lies on us to, prepare ourselves well, is my take on this.
Thank you, Jatin. Professor Pereira, Professor Manjari, either of you, if you have any last thoughts on that.
Student engagement has become a big challenge. We were talking so much about employee engagement, but when you raise the point about teaching, so Jatin, you may be having least experience, but you have more direct connect with that age group, right?
True.
Interesting to bring that up. Professor Pereira, you were going to say something.
Yeah. I think it has been an age-old discussion of research teaching nexus, and We as the knowledge factory, where we have people coming in to prepare them for the real world, as we say. I myself come from a practitioner consulting background. I'm a late entrant into academia. I only graduated my PhD. I completed PhD only in 2013. So I know the real world and the expectations from the real world, very well. But I think more and more mix of the academic and the practitioner in our lineup for teachers is the need of the hour. I think I hear more and more over the years, and this pandemic has sort of pushed this, especially the executive MBAs. They don't want to know the theory. It's they in the master level. They want a mix of both, and I think the future probably could be where, and the bigger business schools in Europe are already doing this for the past 2 or 3 years, where they ask practitioners and academics to work on a course together, instead of each one coming in and telling their own stuff. I think this is probably, they've started in Europe. I'm not sure how successful they will be, where a practitioner and an academic works together to design a course going forward, and they decide who does what, and there's a mesh of that. But I think we are in again unknown territory. The demands of the students, I 100% agree with Manjari. The the engagement span is so small for students. The research shows us that it's 8 minutes that the student of the 80s had the level of engagement or attention span of 8 minutes. It's now 30 seconds, because so it's good. That's another challenge, is what do you do, Jatin, your sort of generation has a very small attention span. What can be done about it? We should probably have more Jatin Pandays in academia, maybe, with a mix of people like me, I'm 52, so maybe I think it's an interesting question you raised in me. I don't think we have answers, but we have to work towards it. They are our key stakeholders. Students are our key stakeholders. We cannot not think about them. So.
Thank you, Professor Pereira, for those thoughts. With that, I think we have come to the end of our time together here. But I felt it was a very engaged discussion. We touched upon a lot of aspects, not just research, but also not just giving research topics, but how do we approach research? How do we approach our teaching? What's our personal take on things, and how do we bring ourselves into the questions? And to engage with our different stakeholders in that. So thank you for all the insights and very energizing and engaged conversation. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Pereira. Thank you, Professor Manjari. Thank you, Professor Manoranjan. And thank you, Professor Jatin. And thank you, audience.
Big thanks to our Professor Priya and Professor Simi.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, Professor Priya.
Thank you. Bye.